I'm Christopher Schoenwald, and welcome to Life as a show intently focused on helping people find their professional pathway by exploring and unearthing the details of jobs from around the world. Before we get into today's episode, I just want to throw this out there. I have a channel over on YouTube, Life as a ... which basically hosts highlights from these audio conversations that I have with these great guests. They typically run 10 to 15 minutes, and they're there to kind of present a different vantage point. You know, for people that aren't into audio, aren't into podcasts, but are still looking for career advice, ideas, help, all that great stuff, send them over to YouTube. Like I said, Life as a ... And if you do get over there, I would love that like or subscribe. I mean, it's the best way to let that algorithm know that the content is worth sharing and should be out there. So anyway, I do thank you for letting me plug this a little bit, but I think it's about time to get into today's episode. I gotta be straight with you. As much as I'm driven to uncover career and or business insights for you, sometimes I am floored beyond belief by guests as far as their stories, work history, and responsibilities. And this guest today checks all of those boxes. And get this, she heads up an entire country's space program. Yeah, you heard that right. As a chief technology officer and aerospace engineer extraordinaire, she oversees the $180 million Australian space program. It's bonkers, right? And she is here today, right here on Life as a, to speak about her career, as well as uncover tips and insights as far as what it takes to succeed in such a professional stratosphere. And listeners who have any interest in aerospace engineering will not want to miss this chat. So without drawing things out any further, let me give you a more formal rundown on who she is, and we can blast into this episode. Dr. Joni Sytsma is an aerospace engineer who began her career at the United States Air Force Research Laboratory before moving to Australia to join the Hypersonic International Flight Research Experiment Program with the Defense Science and Technology Group. Today, Dr. Sytsma is the Chief Technology Officer of the Australian-based Innovative Launch Automation, Novel Materials, Communications, and Hypersonics Program, aka the iLAuNCH program, which is a collaboration between universities and industry to develop Australia's sovereign space capability. Now, as CTO of iLAuNCH, Dr. Sytsma manages Australia's $180 million space program. And she's also a mentor for an Australian science and industrial research organization called On Prime. There, she helps research teams of 2 to 5 people take their projects to the next level through customer discovery activities and more. On the personal side, Dr. Sytsma is a proud trans person who is passionate about supporting the LGBTQIA+ community in deep tech. She believes the more diverse minds that are supported to deliver this value, the more innovative the solutions to the world's problems will be. So with all this noted, I'd love to welcome you to my conversation with Dr. Joni Sytsma. Yeah, welcome to the program. How are you doing today, Dr. Sytsma?
Hello, pleased to be here.
Yeah, really excited for this. You know, your background speaks for itself, and I could not be more thrilled to have you on the program here. In terms of all this, maybe we could jump right into it all. I do have this first segment lined up, and it's called Coloring Wikipedia. And it's just a segment where I read off a couple definitions of something related to what the guest is all about. And I actually went with 2 for you here. I have Chief Technology Officer as well as Aerospace Engineer. So let me just read those off for you, and then we can go from there. Does that sound okay?
Yeah, sure.
Okay. So Chief Technology Officer. A Chief Technology Officer, or CTO, also known as a Chief Technical Officer or Chief Technologist, is an officer tasked with managing technical operations of an organization. They oversee and supervise research and development and serve as a technical advisor to higher executive, such as a Chief Executive Officer. CTOs will make decisions for the overarching technology infrastructure that closely align with the organization's goals. Okay, next one, Aerospace Engineer. Aerospace engineers develop technologies for use in aviation, defense systems, and spacecraft. They may focus on areas such as aerodynamic fluid flow, structural design, guidance, navigation and control, instrumentation and communication, robotics, or propulsion and combustion. There we go. A lot of information coming your way real fast. But first take on those definitions. What do you say to them? What do you think of them?
I'm a chief technology officer for aerospace applications. Frequently a CTO, like technology, big broad word. And most of the time, the T is the internet technology. So a lot of time a CTO manages IT infrastructure, security, that sort of thing. I don't do any of that. But what I do manage is the entire aerospace program that I sit over. And in that program, it fits to a T everything you just described in what an aerospace engineer does. There's materials, there's aerodynamics, there's plasma dynamics, there's space environment, there's propulsion, control, all the things you mentioned. So I'd say both of those mixed together is to a T my role does. I am a technical program manager of all of the projects that my program runs, and each one of them is some sort of aero or space kind of technology.
And it sounds like a lot, obviously, like the way you just laid it out there and the way the definition kind of presents it. As far as like elements that you really get jived up about, things that you really enjoy, are there any particular elements?
Yeah. Propulsion's fun, fire and rockets flying into space. There's anything that gets me going. It's a little bit of fire. But I really am jazzed about additive manufacturing because it's absolutely brought about a new way of putting together aerospace structures. And it's been evolving. And where it is at right now is very exciting because you can just print to order metal structures that are high strength, high quality, reasonable cost, fast turnaround. It's really changing the game for aerospace and space manufacturing because part of what makes aerospace and space expensive is the high-end manufacturing. But 3D printing, you can bring that high-end manufacturing a lot easier, cheaper, and that's really democratizing the entire field.
Yeah, I would assume so, right? I mean, testing, like that was a word that was flashing through my head as you were explaining all that. And like that would have to be a big part of what you do, and to have, the capability to source these materials over and over again quickly. And like you said, economically speaking, yeah, that must be a game changer for you.
So my CTO role is research and development focused. So what does research and development actually mean? It's this cyclical process of I think this will work. And then I have to make something in aerospace. You have to make things. So it's not software where you can just simulate forever. But I have an idea. I have to make something, and then I have to test it. And then I'm going to fail inevitably. And then I'm going to learn from my failures. And these research and development learning cycles is what the game is all about. It's make assumptions, test those assumptions, fail, learn, repeat. And then the next time you blow up the rocket, blow it up in a new and exciting way.
There you go. There you go. Well, maybe we could step into another segment here, a day in the life. And this might be an impossible question for you. And I'm thinking it could be right now, but does a typical day, even a typical week, exist for somebody such as yourself?
Yeah, yes and no. So if I could bin what I do into different buckets, there's the early stage, I call it business development. It's liaising with industry and academia to build new research and development projects for the space program. So there's quite a few hours of liaising, and basically one of the efforts I'm planning is a large satellite program. And so there's a lot of details that go into, these sort of things. And I'm technical oversight over it. So have a lot of BD meetings, setting up the overall business arrangements, but then technical scoping, planning, schedule, all that sort of things. Then there's the programs that are running. So I have reporting requirements. So that's the less interesting thing. It's the filing, the quarterly reports and all that. But then the important work that I have to do is I talk to all the folks who run these. So I manage 25 individual research and development projects at present, with a few more signing up. So I can't be deep in the weeds, but I am from the government and I am here to help. I talk to folks. I see, are you having problems? Do we have to do things? Do we have to change the projects you're working on? Do we have to take programmatic action? Do I need to redo a contract to get a contract mod? So I negotiate with all these folks, understand if they're hitting roadblocks, come up with plans. It has to be plans that everybody is happy with because it's a university industry partnership program. So got to keep the uni happy, keep industry happy. And then once we come up with the plan to fix the problem, which is usually what it is, then we put it in action. I also do a lot of public speaking. I'm trying to be an advocate for STEM in Australia and really get young folks excited about space and aerospace technologies because we're looking at a huge workforce shortage. We're in a workforce shortage. It's only going to get worse. One of the best ways to do it is to get young kids and hook them while they're young, get them to get stars in their eyes like me. And part of that is showing them that you can have a job with stars in your eyes. You know what I mean? So get the young folks interested in space, and hopefully that'll solve a problem, 10, 15 years down the down the track. But who's to tell?
Well, first take, I mean, like it sounds like a lot, just the way that you presented it there. And there's a lot going on. And we're going to get into this later about how you personally manage this, how you keep track of all these things. But, as far as that goes, like a lot of the guests on this program often speak to this point of, some of the stressors within their work being scheduling and whatnot, but also that element being something that delivers a lot of fulfillment to them as well. The fact that they're, using left brain, right brain, jumping into this task, jumping out of it, putting themselves into another. Again, it can appear stressful, and I'm sure it is, but there must be fulfillment attached to it all as well.
Well, I love working with people. I love talking to people. So this is great because most of my job is communications, and it's between business communications and technical communications. That's where I have a lot of value I bring, and I enjoy talking to people. So business folk, they need to understand how these technology elements interact with the business side of things. Is there a problem or is there a boon? And ultimately, like technical people, they're not so good at communicating, like the so what, particularly to business outcomes, because business outcomes are money, right? Technical outcomes are the thing works, the science works. So a lot of what I get to do is be that person in the middle that can communicate adeptly on both sides. And I like it. And what am I doing but talking to people and playing with toys all the time? Every single thing in the portfolio is manufactured. And that's really exciting to me because I hold it in my hands. It's real. I've worked in software a lot, and I have this intangible value that I apply to my work effort in software. And it's a little bit hard to see and feel. But in the space program, everything we're making. So it's really, really cool to be able to talk, plan. And then on the outcome, I've got a new shiny piece of metal that we're going to fly on a satellite next year. Yeah, it's that really keeps me excited.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Well, it probably doesn't get much more exciting than that, truthfully speaking. One quick follow-up question. As far as that communication skill that you have of kind of bridging the technical and then also like the business community and whatnot, was that something that always came easy for you, or did you develop that over time?
Oh no, oh no. I look back at my early career and I was actually thrust into a position where I was the token basic researcher for the organization. I was the only person doing research, and the organization thrust me in front of everybody and said, look at this person who's doing research. We've ticked our KPI. There you go.
Yeah.
And what was I but just a young aerospace engineer geek, a bit on the spectrum. And I was forced to get in front of, I worked for the Air Force, so I was getting in front of colonels and generals. And, there's a little bit of pucker factor when you get in front of those folks, you want to come across very well. And of course, I was rubbish at it, right? Like early days, everybody's like, so what? I don't care. Why should I fund that person? But then I learned how to play the game, which is, I convinced them, so what? Funding magic. So ultimately, once I understood the connection of cause and effect, where you convince the business people the outcomes have something they want, right? But you have to do the R&D to get it. And then my role through my career has been negotiating the R&D to achieve those business outcomes. So yes, I have to understand all the tech stuff and communicate it to the business people, but I have to understand that what I'm doing is valuable too, because if there's no financial outcome, then it's basic research. And our program is not a basic research, it's an applied research and development program. So,
Yeah, yeah. I mean, the reason I bring that up is I think oftentimes people put themselves in boxes, especially young people as well. Like they might self-recognize themselves as somebody who's like, well, I'm good technically speaking, but I'm terrible dealing with people, and like these are skills that can be developed. And especially it does help once you can make that connection of why it's so critically important. Like your job becomes that much more exciting when you're able to communicate these ideas across and then get it, to the point of it actually becoming a thing. And yeah, I just think it's empowering to hear that again for young people in particular.
one thing I'd say is your mobile phone is a computer and it's software defined, and it only does the apps that you load onto it. This is software defined too. So you are fully capable of reprogramming yourself. I reprogram myself significantly. And look, if you've got a problem in your head, that's what cognitive behavioral therapy and some of these other kind of things are. So really, the limitations are always in your head. And once you remove them, then watch out, world. So
Love it. Love it. Well, maybe we could step into another segment here, a pathways one, and we rewind a little bit. I'd love to hear about what initially, got you into aerospace engineering. From my research, I understand it was always a passion for you, but all the same, maybe you could share a little bit more about that.
So I grew up in Florida, not far from Kennedy Space Center, and I got to go there all the time. My dad was a space geek, and he was always dragging the family up. Kennedy Space Center is like a theme park, so it's a fun place to take the family anyway. And while you're there, there's rocket launches. So in high school, I'm like, I'm going to be a rocket scientist. How do you be a rocket scientist? Oh, study aerospace engineering. And so that was the first thing. I got into university. I went and did my undergrad aerospace engineering. Couldn't get a job because in 2024, the space shuttle had just blown up and the war had just started. So the aerospace economy was constricted like you wouldn't believe. Whereas the rest of the economy was roaring and everybody was getting jobs, the aerospace people were basically the graduates. We barely had any jobs offered to us. So I stuck around and got my master's degree, and 2 years later, the economy was better, and I managed to get a job, and then did my PhD while working full time. So I'm an addict for the rockets and the space stuff, and definitely a glutton for punishment because the PhD took 7 years of working full time and PhD full time. Not
Wow.
doing that again. Thank you very much.
Yeah, I guess so. I guess so. Well, it's all sort of paid off, I think, for you by the sounds of it, or the way things have evolved to this point. But yeah, that must have been a bit of a gauntlet to have
I
gotten through.
never thought I was going to be at the top of a country space program,
Who
and
does? I suppose,
but on the other hand, it's amazing to be able to drive national efforts in
Oh
airspace
yeah,
and space research and development, and really build the country's manufacturing base for these
yeah,
really high-end manufacturing of space and aerospace componentry. So it's
yeah.
really exciting.
Yeah, 100%. In terms of making your way to Australia, I understand from the researching is that it was partly based off of a work project that you initially were on, and then also some personal things that were going on within your life as well that, led you to, making Australia your adopted home, essentially. Maybe you could fill us in on that a little bit.
Well, I work for the US Air Force Research Lab on the big hypersonics project. So, hypersonics back then was early stage research and development, and I was the technical officer kind of person over our local vehicle airframe structures group. And, one thing that I was saying, and it goes back to my software versus hardware, is I'm like, we've just spent a couple years doing all these designs and software, paper designs, CAD, finite elements, all that stuff. But none of it was real. and Australia was launching hypersonic rockets every year in a science project called HiFire. And I just wanted to be a part of it because I'm like, if I touch that and am a part of that, then I'm going to learn so much because you learn so much more by manufacturing and flying than by just analysis paralysis. So I secured a secondment over here. It was for 2 years, ended up extending it to 2.5 to the rest of my life. And well, part of what happened is I got over here. I was terrified to transition in the deep south of America because I was only going to be treated extremely poorly. My career was going to go nowhere. I was probably going to be out of a job and have to move to one of the blue states, to just avoid all the badness. And when I moved to Australia on this comment, I'm like, oh, it's safe here. It's fine. So I'm going to blossom over here. But doing it on the job and then looking at going back to the deep south, I was like, grass is greener. I got to stay. So I stayed.
There you go. Like I like that story. I think it's inspirational on a lot of different levels. It also speaks to this notion of how the personal and the professional can intersect at different points along one's career. And, some difficult decisions have to be made along the way, but ultimately you kind of have to understand where, things are going to work out the best for you or where you think they could go. And, oftentimes it does involve some difficult decisions, but all the same, it seems like, again, that you've landed in a spot that's really, really worked out well.
It's worked
So
out well.
yeah, yeah. Okay, all right. Well, thanks for sharing that. I've got this other question here, I suppose, in this yet another segment of Q&A discovery. I'd love to know a little bit more about what it was like for you to shift from an engineer to that of a position of leadership. Once you got into this position of, either being a CTO of the iLAuNCH program within Australia, or I'm sure there could have been a few stepping stones before that. But what was that transition like?
I mean, it really goes back more than a decade. So I was an individual contributor, aerospace engineer, working on drones 2009, 10, 11. But coming into 2012, when I was, graduating or getting ready to graduate, I was transitioning away from being an individual contributor and I was taking on more and more responsibility for the technical activities. And what was hard is initially I've got to plan my own work effort. So I know the end state that we're all aiming for, and I kind of know where we are here, but I'm supposed to be the smart one telling my boss how to get from point A to point B. So that was when I was individual contributor, but then I had to dream bigger because suddenly now I've got a team. So I've got one person, two people reporting to me. So now I have to help plan their work efforts. And then as we grew bigger, and then I transitioned over to the hypersonics program, now it's like I'm technically in charge of designing an entire vehicle with all the systems. And now I have to liaise with all the system leads. So propulsion structures, guidance, navigation, control, other different aspects of the vehicle, aerodynamics. So suddenly I'm stepping up, but it's like a step up in planning where I understand the technologies, but maybe I'm not the deepest person. And ultimately that's what I think you have to do to be an effective technical program manager is you have to have enough understanding of the components that make your gizmo work. But you've got to be able to lead from current state to final state. And then you've got to work with people. And those people are, hardcore engineers. And you've got to have a lot of understanding for them because it's not linear. It's not like 3 days and I'm 3 days worth of progress. Breakthroughs are made, and frequently it's very nonlinear. So I started back in 2013 with my first big team. I had 13 people that I was managing technically, and then it's been fairly continuous since then. I've almost always been a team lead to some extent or another. It's just how big were the teams, in the startup land, didn't have a lot of funding. So my teams were very small and very young. So it really put the onus on me to be the trainer for the young folks, whereas my previous teams, they were all had their own PhDs. They were all subject matter experts. So it was more like me asking them what needs to be done as opposed to telling them what needs to be done. Very different team leadership experiences from, from easy team lead to very hard. My current role, so like I'm clearly not running 25 projects all by myself. Each of the team leads is a PhD professor. So like I don't need to teach them how to suck eggs. They're good at it. Ultimately, I'm just here to help them manage their way through the project in a way that keeps, like I said, everybody happy.
Two words come to mind when I'm listening to all this is trust and delegation. Those two things must be massive components to making all of this work for you. And I don't know how easy those things were for you to adopt and to take on. But I think oftentimes they can be a bit of a challenge, at least initially, like when your name
Yeah.
ultimately is on it and, you're the one who's responsible for some of these things, that can be a bit of a challenge, I think, at least initially.
In the early days, I worked myself to death because I didn't trust or delegate. What did that mean? That I was stressed out? I'd say the outcomes were good, right?
Hmm.
Because I worked for them really hard.
Yeah.
But ultimately, in my current role, for example, I have to trust and delegate extremely
Yeah.
well. And ultimately, I've got to rely on the folks underneath me to do the right thing. And then I've got to help them when stuff is broken and needs fixing. So you've got to get familiar with the concepts of trust and delegation. And then you got to have the experience and failure. And like, I think you learn a lot personally from failure. I've definitely learned a lot from burning myself out against the work. On the other hand, I can handle a lot more now. And I think I know how to manage a bigger program. So I keep on saying, give me $1 billion program. That's what I want to do next. $1 billion space program. Put that into the ether.
There we go. There we go. Give it 5, 10 years. Who knows, right? Who knows? Now, getting back to the work itself, what you're involved in, obviously it's highly, highly complex stuff. And I'm thinking here, returning to that PhD, bringing that back up again. I'm thinking here, just the nature of what you're involved in, like the pace of change and the rapid evolution of technology. A lot of the variables that you're probably studying at that point have evolved to the point where, like what you studied then versus now is utterly different. And that could be, one, a bit of a challenge because you're constantly having to re-educate yourself, but also, exciting just because like you don't know what's coming next. And you're constantly trying to evolve yourself and your own learning to be able to apply a lot of this. What would you say to that aspect of the work itself, the evolving nature of it all, technologically speaking?
So one thing that I think everybody now has to accept is the pace. Because, like, think about it if you're a medieval peasant, the pace of research and development was hundreds of years, right? And suddenly you've got a better wheel bearing or something like that. But the Industrial Revolution was picking up the pace. And then today, with our planet, with is it 8 billion people and AI, the pace is insane. So I'd say it's really hard to keep up on the pace because, particularly with fast moving target like AI, there's nothing slowing it down, at least with aerospace. What's slowing it down is I have to make the thing. And there's only so many ways to make the thing. And the ways you make the thing mature very slowly. So aerospace manufacturing has changed a lot, but not as much as computing has. And so like, how do you keep on top of the pace? Because there's people who are working while you're sleeping, and I find that a bit challenging. So every time I see like some new thing that comes out, I'm like, whoa, well, that's doable now. So that's not something I had considered. That was in sci-fi last week, but now it's not sci-fi anymore. So and I don't know how to handle that because like I'm getting older. As I get further on in my career, it's like, how do you keep up with the pace when the pace is only increasing? And of course, there's like global investment that is rapidly outpacing Australia. And how can we not get left behind? And how can we compete? Which is the other thing that has to be considered. It's like I'm not just running a local thing, right? It's a global marketplace. So whatever we do, whatever we develop has to be globally stand on its own 2 feet. And how do we know that by the time it gets developed, the world hasn't changed? And so I'd say that's a big challenge. I don't have a solution, but it is a very big challenge.
Absolutely. I mean, that's something I think like everyone, is grappling with whatever industry they're in right now, but particularly I would assume in one like yours and what you're involved in, and it probably comes back to the communicative point too, because you have, outsiders or those say within business development that might not understand like the systems and processes that you guys are involved in, and how you have to follow a certain set of rigor and testing to get things out, but at the same time, as you said, like things are constantly evolving, so people on the outside looking in are expecting, well, I just saw this last week in the news. What do you mean you can't do that now? What do you mean this technology is not in whatever you're working on? That must be, yeah, a challenge, but then also I guess one of those points where it really does come down to critical communication and ways of letting people know, why.
And the dream has to be sold in both directions. So researchers want to, focus on research and work on these things that interest them, whereas business needs to sell stuff. And getting researchers aligned against business wants and needs, that's a bit of a challenging sell. But on the other hand, like a program like ours brings the resources, so brings the money to pay for that collaboration. And then it brings the excitement in our program, particularly that we are flying a lot of things to space. We launched the first satellite in the program in March, and we're just going to launch another 5 more before end of December 26th. So it's exciting to be able to work on something that actually flies to space. And I think that's a large allure that brings folks together.
Oh, 100%, 100%. As a complete outsider, that sounds incredibly thrilling to me. Just kind of imagining myself in a situation like that, or in a program that does have like, outcomes such as that. This other question here, for aspiring, aerospace engineers who might be, I don't know, maybe put off or a little bit unsure about some of the programs that could be developed, whether we're talking like defense or weaponry, things of that nature. What mental frameworks or modes of thought would you employ based off of your background to kind of, work with some of those things, like some of the more controversial elements of potentially being an aerospace engineer?
One thing I always ask when people have strong opinions, have strong feelings about anything is, where'd that opinion come from? You know, like, is that your opinion? Is it your friend's opinion? Is it your family's opinion? So all technology that is good is dual use. Okay. The invention of bronze was great in that now I had an axe that I could chop down a tree with or chop down an enemy's head. So like that's technology that's dual use that we are all aware of for thousands of years now. And today, where are we, right? We have AI that is just exploding. Okay. And as a technology, you would say, do I want to work on AI because it's exciting and it's going somewhere? And it has the huge potential to make the world a better place. But of course, it's going to be used by defense and the military. Aerospace, it's about manufacturing things that fly real fast and sometimes are pointy. Now, that can be used to give you telecommunications worldwide from the sky. And so you can have YouTube and TikTok and make your watch Netflix. And so you would say that is completely innocuous as a technology, or it can be used to plan and negotiate a battle attack. And it's the same tool, right? It's exactly the same technology. It's telecommunications from space to Earth. Manufacturing airplanes, airplanes can be for both uses. They can take you on a holiday and they can take a bomb and drop it. And why do you believe what you believe? First thing. Once you've identified what you believe, then you need to focus on, do I actually believe it? Because you can change what you believe. So if you find yourself appalled by what you're doing, just assess why do I believe that? And maybe I could change myself. But then the other thing is to recognize that if you work on technology and it's good technology, then it's inevitably going to be dual use. So if you want to align yourself on the civilian side, then you need to purposefully and focus your efforts on the civilian side, because inevitably somebody else is going to pick up that same piece of technology you're developing and say, well, this is great in the military, we use it there. And you can't get away from that. And this has happened with silicon manufacture in America. So the same chips that give us mobile phones and TikTok and Snapchat are the same chips that can be used in guided weapon systems. So yeah, I think that's something hard if you're going to work in technology, that it's always going to be dual use. So you've got to accept it, do what you're doing in a way that focuses according to your morals. And then the last thing is, I don't know, it's hard to work in technology and avoid these things. So maybe don't work in technology.
Yeah, I appreciate that insight and that perspective. I think it's a critical one to have. And again, these are issues that maybe young people are grappling with. And I think the way that it was just laid out there, it makes perfect logical sense. And there are choices to be made for an individual who is interested in that, like you said. But at least I think it allows them to think this through with a certain degree of clarity. So I do appreciate that. Now, clearly, I mean, you as an individual are full of, accomplishment. Your experiences speak to themselves, and what you're involved in right now kind of speaks to that point. But none of this implies that any of this has come easy. I have this quote from you referring to your career. I'm just going to read this off really quickly about some of the stresses and pressures that you're involved in. And you've said on the record, I'm a high achiever. I'm go, go, go all the time. In my normal life, I'm highly stressed with work and rely heavily on athleticism and socialization to manage my stress and stay hyper productive. Maybe you could speak to this point of managing that aspect of your work. You've kind of lightly touched upon it earlier in our conversation, but I think this would be a helpful one as well for listeners to hear a little bit more about.
So I learned a long time ago that maybe somebody would call me ADHD, right? Never been prescribed any meds against ADHD, but I pretty much meet those requirements. Now, yeah, I could get meds, and meds would treat the symptoms. What I found works actually extremely well is if I work out a lot, hang out with my friends, do a lot of high intensity cardio kind of activities, then it keeps my brain in a state that I can be productive, I can focus. The bad side of that is when I break myself, because I'm really athletic and I break myself a bit too often, then it's like, well, that crutch that I've been relying on that has allowed me to be really, really productive and switched on and good at work. Suddenly I lose the crutch because my leg doesn't work or my arm doesn't work. So like that's a big downside of that sort of reliance. On the other hand, it's like everybody has to learn how to unlock the keys to their own brain. I think I've learned how to do that fairly effectively. And if everybody else could do that, then you can start to realize your true potential. So it's a bit hard to get around. Everybody's going to be different, but you've got to learn yourself and learn your keys to productivity and happiness, and then go chase it. The downside is that I know I'll be active until I'm old, but as I get older, when I get broken, I stay broken longer, and that is kind of crap. So I've got to develop some new kind of coping methodologies. And yeah.
Yeah, 100%. I like those points there. It's, knowing yourself, a bit of self-reflection in there. And also that point of it just being an evolution. It's constantly going to evolve. Things are going to change. So you've got to, keep on top of this. It's not just fix it once and you're good to go. It might be for a decade or so, but like you said, things do change, unfortunately. So, well, maybe we could step into this middle segment here, a water cooler story segment. And here I just invite, guests to indulge listeners with the story, something related to their work. And I'm utterly, sit in my pants waiting to hear what you're going to tell us here today, just based off the nature of your work, being an aerospace engineer, being a rocket scientist. What do you got for us today?
I mean, I like to talk about the rockets that I've launched or attempted to launch. And because the rockets that I have launched, and we've launched two big rockets into space hypersonically on the HiFire program, they were just so successful. And the team I worked on was an oiled machine. Everybody really knew what their job was. There wasn't that many of us. There's like 15 people on that team. And
Wow.
the the quality of everybody's focus and their work was so superior. And the procedures and methodologies they put forward to solve problems was just so common sense. Like, let's not analyze it too much. Let's analyze it just the right amount and then build, test, destroy, repeat. And so working with that team, then I moved over to Gilmore, which was a much, much more new team because Gilmore is Australia's space rocket company. At the time, I was employee 20, so it's reasonable to say that it was a very young startup. With like I was the experience and the other folks that were hired at the same time as me. We brought the experience. We worked on this rocket program called One Vision. It was supposed to fly to up to 100 kilometers in altitude, so almost space, supposed to go really fast. And we worked on it. I managed the range safety activity, so it's making sure that it won't, fall on anybody. And then it blew up on the ground when we went to launch it. And it was like coming off of two successful, hyper productive rocket launches with like fully professional teams. At that point, some of those people had launched 15 rockets successfully. And then moving over to a very young startup, we all put the effort in, but ultimately it's like when things fail, that was the opportunity to learn why it failed. And I'd never been in a failure investigation like that. And it was so eye-opening because we found the 27 things that would have caused the rocket to blow up. 27. And then the one thing that did, it beat those other 27 to it. So, going through the process of success, we never looked back and looked for those things that could have failed the rocket. We just, said, successful, sweet, process the data, move on, do it again. But with the failure, we really understood and internalized all these things that would have eaten our lunch and the one thing that did eat our lunch. And then basically that way the next time we do it, it won't happen again. So I've absolutely taken this concept of failure is fine. That's what success smells like. Like it smells like failure, but you got to learn and you got to institutionalize that learning. So, one of the things we did is we printed all these 20 things on a poster and we put these posters around the building. Just kind of like an institutional reminder is these things these things caused us to fail last time. Don't do those things. And I really believe that into the future is like, let's just take the failures and hang them on the wall. Another thing we did is we occasionally let the smoke out of electronics. We actually had a wall where we hung the electronics because after we smoked them on accident, because it's just kind of like an indicator of visual failure, but it's an indicator of learn what you did. Don't do that again. Each one of those circuit boards is like $1,000. So like, don't do that again.
Yeah. Yeah. I love that. I mean, like metaphorically speaking as well. I mean, just how valuable that is. It's like taking that concept of failure and just flipping it around for a lot of people. I mean, we say it over and over again. I think it's become sort of like a thing within culture is failure is a good thing. Failure is a good thing, but it's still a hard lesson to learn for a lot of people. But to hear somebody of certainly of your stature and your team, embracing it to that degree as well and really making it a visual point of reference for you, I think that sort of like amplifies that message, which again, it can only be helpful to people that are trying to process it.
I want to have rapid progress and I want to move towards success as quickly as possible. And my opinion is the faster you can skip across those rocks that are failure and use those pavers on your way to get across the river. But that means you've got to be, breaking things and it has to be moderate, right? Like you can't just go around and break things constantly. But on the other hand, if you do it the other way, where it's analysis paralysis, software engineering design, never build anything, never fly anything, but if I do ever get the money to fly it, I can't fail. So everything has to be zero risk. So I believe that is totally the old way of doing it. And that's why you have NASA with the SLS, trillions of dollars on that system, only flown once, and then SpaceX, and they fly almost every day. And their big rocket is going to take us to the moon and Mars. So, like for real, not NASA's rocket. NASA's rocket is, I think it's going to get canceled because they've just analysis paralysis. And SpaceX is blowing things up as regularly as the government will let them. And so,
Yeah. Insightful. I think it's an interesting take on it all. That how this cycle of failure and success and failure has changed ultimately, and some of the ramifications for that, and some of the benefits, really. As you just sort of outlined there, which is kind of a nice point to segue into our last segment here, our crystal ball segment. We're looking at the future, trends, predictions, so on and so forth, and we've kind of lightly touched upon some of these topics already. But as far as like the field of aerospace engineering and where it's going right now, you've already touched on AI, and as well as, rapid prototyping and all these different things. Where do you see all of this going? What's your crystal ball when we're looking at this topic?
I actually see a cataclysm that's already happened. It just hasn't happened yet. We put so much mass in orbit. Not all of it's under control. When they smack into each other, moving at 7 kilometers a second, you create a spall field of spall that's 7 kilometers per second that smacks into other things. And that's what we call the Kessler syndrome. It's only happened in a few small scale kind of interactions, but we're moving into a world where we have SpaceX, the Starlink constellation. China's going to have their own constellation. We have numerous commercial space things going up, and the amount of mass in orbit has been getting super cheap. So we're putting more mass in orbit. So when it happens that we, have big cosmic collisions, it's going to cause a problem. And the way it's going to affect us is suddenly that space-based internet that you came to rely on ain't going to work no more, right? That's near-term short-range GPS that Starlink is going to offer, because Starlink is going to give us a different kind of GPS, and it's going to work better than GPS. And we're all going to love it, right? We're all going to use it. It's going to be in everybody's logistics systems. But when that stops working, so, two major things that we rely on: data from space and navigation, and then Earth observation, maybe the third one. Those three things are tremendous value that space gives us. And I think it'll be a global catastrophe if we have a degradation in service in any of those three. So in my crystal ball, I see that as happening because humans are really terrible at managing their environments. They tend to destroy it and then look for ways to fix it. As much as the international regulations are changing, and the regulations are desperately changing to try and keep up with the changes in mass in orbit, but regulation is never fast enough to prevent a cataclysm. Usually in human history, regulations come into effect after we've poisoned the river. So that's my crystal ball. It's a bit of a downer. The rest of my life is pretty much upbeat. I mean, we're going to have people in space hotels in about 5 years. So like, that's pretty cool. But I see this looming threat of too much mass, uncoordinated in a central level. And, if you have aircraft flying over your city, you have a local air traffic controller, because the aircraft can only bump into each other over your city. So that's all you need. But for space, we need space traffic control for the whole of space, which is all the governments would have to agree with each other. Oh, that's really hard in the first place. The UN has interesting power versus lack of power. So should the UN own, space traffic control, or should it be something else? Is it a private company? Like, all these things to create the necessary infrastructure are in the too hard buckets, so they're not being done right now. But we're setting ourselves up collectively for this cataclysm where our space internet is not going to work. our space navigation is not going to work, and then our Earth observation pictures are not going to be there. So suddenly I'm not going to know if a hurricane's forming in the middle of the Atlantic and is going to come and smack me. I'm not going to know there's floods, fires, famine, or all these things that are bad. I'm not going to be able to predict my crops. I'm not going to be able to, and then I'm not going to be able to drive because I don't know how to drive without navigation. So
Yeah.
anyway, sorry to bum you out.
Yeah, I would like to be optimistic just based off the fact that somebody such as yourself who is aware of this. I'm sure there's conversations on this, but again, as you just outlined, like all the different like groups that would have to be aligned on something like this, just governments of the world and organizations and everything else. It does, yeah, give me some pause there. And it could be one of those things where unfortunately we're going to have to fail in a major way and lose some of these things momentarily, hopefully, not for too long before we, get our act together. But that certainly is a concern, and it speaks to this point of this constant evolution of the field that you're within. I mean, certainly exciting, but obviously, some challenge there as well. But I've got to say, I mean, this conversation, we just blown through it. I feel like we just got started here, Dr. Sytsma. But I've thoroughly enjoyed this. And I know that, listeners are going to as well. And you've shared a lot of insights that'll be incredibly helpful. So once again, thank you for taking some time and joining the program today.
Happy to be here, and thanks for the chat.
Now, for those interested in learning more about Dr. Sytsma and her work, you can do so via LinkedIn. And for reference, this information, including the link, will be in the show notes. And I mean, hey, if you like today's show, please be sure to tell a friend and share. To show further support, you can always rate, review, and subscribe wherever you access your podcast. And lastly, as I mentioned off the top, head on over to YouTube. There I will have some highlights from this audio conversation. And if you do make it over there, I would really appreciate a like or subscribe. Now, finally, don't forget to join us on the next episode of Life as where we'll continue to explore and unearth the details of professions and the people behind them. I'm your host, Christopher Schoenwald. Until next time, stay curious about life and living.